Paperwork's final, Bernie. 10 o'clock, like it says. Perry Ibarra didn't look up from the intake form. His pen tapped the euthanasia line twice, a small habit, like he needed the ink to agree with him. The room went quiet, the way a held breath goes quiet. Somewhere behind the steel mesh, Ranger's growl started low, more vibration than sound, rising out of his chest like something scraping loose. Nobody in that room noticed his weight shift off his front paws. Nobody but the old man setting a folding camp chair on the concrete, 3 feet from the kennel door, its canvas seat sun-bleached and stitched along one seam in uneven black thread. "Sir, this area is for staff," Perry said, finally glancing up. Lorenzo Hogan didn't answer. He lowered himself into the chair like he'd done it 100 times in this exact spot, and the growling, slowly, began to change its shape. The chair had a way of settling that told you it had been folded and unfolded more times than most men fold laundry in a year. One leg had a hose clamp where the rivet used to be. The canvas seat sagged in the shape of somebody's weight, molded there by 2 months of Tuesdays. Lorenzo set his forearms on his knees, not on the armrests, and studied the dog the way a rancher studies weather coming in over a ridge. Not afraid of it, just reading it. "Sir," Perry set his pen down on the intake form, the cap still off. "I need you to step back from the kennel. This dog is flagged aggressive. We've had 2 bite incidents on file since intake." "He's not aggressive," Lorenzo said. "He's guarding a hurt." Perry blinked. "Excuse me?" "Watch his weight." Lorenzo didn't point. He never pointed, not with this dog. "He's got it all on the back legs, front's barely touching. And his head's not down because he's scared of you. It's down because lifting it pulls something across his shoulders he doesn't want pulled." Bernie, who had been standing by the record cabinet with a folder half open in her hands, looked up. She didn't say anything yet. She just watched the dog shift his weight the exact way the old man had described it, a half second after he'd said it would happen. "That's not," Perry started, then stopped, because the dog had, in fact, done exactly that. He cleared his throat and picked his pen back up like it might rescue him. "Regardless, the behavioral hold protocol runs on a schedule, and this animal's window closed at close of business yesterday. I know what day it is." Lorenzo's voice didn't rise to meet the tension in the room. It stayed low and even, the kind of voice built for calling a dog off a slope without spooking it. "I've known what day it is for 2 months. That stopped Perry mid-motion, form half turned toward Bernie for a signature. "You've been here before." "Every Tuesday." Lorenzo kept his eyes on the dog. Ranger's ears had come up half an inch, not toward Perry, not toward the fluorescent hum overhead, but toward the chair, toward the specific weight settling into it. "I sit here for a while. I don't feed him through the wire. I don't put my hand near the gate. I just sit." "Why?" Perry's tone had shifted from procedural to something closer to genuine confusion. The kind that comes when a rule stops making sense in front of a person's actual eyes. Lorenzo didn't answer that, not directly. He watched the dog lower his head another inch, ears still tipped forward, and his breathing didn't change at all while he did it. The same slow diaphragm pull in, the same unhurried release, whether the dog was growling or going quiet. Bernie noticed that before she noticed anything else about him. In 11 years running intake at this shelter, she had watched 100 people flinch at that particular sound the dog made low in his chest. This man's shoulders hadn't moved. "Then your file's wrong," Lorenzo said. "Or it's only telling you what the last 4 minutes looked like." Bernie set the folder down slowly on the counter. She looked at Perry, then at the chair, then at the old man sitting in it like he'd grown there. "You've been here before," she said. It wasn't a question, not really. she already knew. "Every Tuesday," Lorenzo said. "Sometimes Wednesday if the truck's giving me trouble." 2 months, Bernie said. "I checked the sign-in sheet after the second week. I thought maybe you were looking to adopt. Then I thought maybe you were lonely. Then I stopped trying to guess." Perry's pen had gone quiet against the edge of the intake form, held loose in his hand, forgotten now that the room had turned toward something he didn't understand. "You've never once asked to take him," Perry said. "Not once. I'd remember that." "No," Lorenzo agreed. "I haven't." Ranger's ears had come forward at the sound of the chair creaking under Lorenzo's weight. That small shift he made when he settled his hips back and let his spine find the canvas. The dog's head had lowered an inch. Not a threat posture, something closer to listening. Bernie remembered the lead line. It had been early on, maybe the 3rd or 4th week, before she'd learned to expect him sitting there at 9:30 like the shelter owed him the hour. One of the outdoor runs had a frayed lead hanging off the gatepost, chewed through by a hound 2 kennels down, and she'd been about to throw it in the trash bin when Lorenzo asked if he could look at it. She'd handed it over without thinking much of it. He hadn't asked for tools. He'd just turned it over in his hands, found the good end, and tied something quick and small and impossibly neat. Not a knot she recognized from any 4-H class or hardware store diagram, but something that looked like it had been taught to him by someone who needed a rope to hold a man's weight on a slope, not just a dog on a leash. She'd asked him where he learned it. He'd said, "Somewhere it mattered," and handed the lead back like the conversation was finished. She hadn't pushed. There was something about the way he closed a subject, not rudely, just completely, the way a door closes when the latch is good, that told her pushing wouldn't get her anywhere. "You fixed that lead," she said now, "back in the fall. I kept it in the supply room. I didn't want to use it, didn't want to untie what you'd done." Lorenzo's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "It's just a knot, Bernie." "It's not, though." She crossed her arms, and for once since he'd sat down, there was less procedure in her voice and more of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of respect. "You come here every week. You sit outside this one kennel. You've never asked about any other dog in this building. Not the beagle mix, not the shepherd pups by the front desk that everybody fusses over left foreleg. The one Ranger kept curled just off the concrete, like it cost him something to set it down flat." Perry cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the small room. He glanced at the wall clock, then at the folder in his hand, then at Lorenzo, as if hoping the old man might rearrange himself to match the schedule. "Mr. Hogan." He said the name carefully, like he'd had to ask Bernie for it a minute ago and didn't want to get it wrong twice. "The procedure's scheduled for 11. That's 40 minutes. County protocol requires the intake room cleared of civilian visitors 30 minutes prior. I need you to gather your things." "I'm not in anybody's way over here." "It's not about being in the way, sir. It's about the protocol." Perry tapped the folder against his palm, a small, nervous rhythm, like a man keeping time with a song only he could hear. "I have a tech coming into prep. I have a form that needs 3 signatures before noon. I don't have room in the schedule for—" He stopped himself, chose a gentler word than the one he'd started toward. "For this." Lorenzo's breathing didn't change. In, hold, out. The same 4 count it had held since he sat down, like there wasn't a clock on the wall at all. Like the room ran on some older measurement he alone still kept. "You said 30 minutes, Lorenzo said. "That gives us time to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. The window closed. I told you that." "You told me a date. I'm asking you to look at the dog." Perry did look, briefly, with the flat certainty of a man sizing up a problem he'd already decided how to solve. Ranger had gone quiet again, that low, simmering hush that wasn't calm so much as coiled, weight cocked back onto the hindquarters, head dropped just enough to track Perry's hands without seeming to. "I've looked at the dog every day for 2 weeks," Perry said. "That's my job. Bite history, unpredictable aggression, non-responsive to standard handling." "Bernie's notes are thorough. I trust her notes." "Her notes are thorough," Lorenzo agreed. "They're also wrong about what they're describing." Bernie, by the desk, froze with the folder half raised, caught somewhere between her supervisor and the old man in the frayed coat. "With respect," Perry said, and his voice climbed a half register, the way it did when the word respect meant the opposite. "I don't have time this morning for a debate about temperament theory. I have a dog scheduled, I have a tech on the way, and I have a visitor who needs to clear the room in..." He checked the clock again. 28 minutes. 28 minutes is enough. Enough for what? Lorenzo didn't answer that. He kept his eyes on the dog, on the tremor working up through that curled foreleg like a current looking for ground. And something in his face had gone past patient into something with more weight behind it, something Perry didn't have. "He hasn't used up anything," Lorenzo said. "You've used up your patience. That's a different animal entirely." Perry's pen stopped moving. He looked up from the intake form like the words had come from somewhere other than the folding chair. "Excuse me? You said he's used up his chances. That's not true. Nobody's given him a chance yet."
2 months I've been sitting here, and not once has anybody in this building put a hand on that dog without a catchpole in the other one. Lorenzo said it without heat, flat and measured, like a man calling out numbers off an instrument. "That's not the dog's failing." Bernie had gone quiet at the counter, her hands resting on the intake folder, empty of anything else now, and something in her face had shifted from procedure to attention. She wasn't looking at Perry anymore. She was looking at Ranger's left ear, tipped forward under the fluorescent light, and at the pale notch cut into the cartilage that she'd cataloged 100 times as scarring, unremarkable, consistent with prior injury. "Mr. Hogan," Perry said, and there was strain now under the courtesy. A man watching his own clock run past a line he'd drawn for himself. "I understand you've formed an attachment. I do. But attachment isn't a placement plan, and the county doesn't process based on..." "Wait." Bernie's voice cut in. Not loud, but it stopped him mid-word, the way a hand on the arm stops a swing already started. She'd pulled the folder closer, tilted it toward the light. "This ear notch. I logged it as laceration scarring when he came in. I never had it looked at close." She glanced up, first at Perry, then longer at Lorenzo. "There's lettering in it. Or there was. It's mostly grown over." Perry set the pen down with the particular irritation of a man whose schedule has just acquired a variable he didn't budget for. "It's an ear. Dogs tear ears in kennels constantly. It's not a tear pattern." Bernie was already reaching for the folder's back pocket, the one nobody ever opened because nobody ever needed the microchip history for a stray with no listed origin. "This is placed. Even. Like it was done on purpose, and it's just old enough that it healed strange." She looked at Lorenzo again, and this time the flatness had gone out of her voice completely, leaving something rawer underneath it. "You knew that was there before I said anything." Lorenzo didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the dog, on the way Ranger's weight had come forward onto his front pasterns, ears no longer flat but canted, listening to the room the way dogs listen to weather before it arrives. His breathing hadn't changed, hadn't sped, hadn't caught. It moved the way it had moved for 2 months in that chair, low and even, diaphragm doing the work instead of the chest. "I knew there'd be something there," he said finally. "Didn't know if it survived the scarring." Perry looked between them, the folder,
The Bernie crouched by the kennel door with the wand in her hand.
Moving the way you move, around something that might bite you, for a reason nobody's written down yet. Ranger's ears flattened. His weight shifted back onto his haunches, not forward. Lorenzo clocked it before she did, said nothing, kept his breathing slow and even, the same 4 count in, 4 count out he'd used on a mountainside a lifetime ago, when a different dog's ears did the same thing. The wand chirped once, a small, thin sound, almost apologetic. "Got it," Bernie said, and pulled the little screen close to her face, squinting. "Okay, registered handler tag, military intake, this is old. Deployment code's faded, but I can read the unit line."
"Hang on." "You don't need to hang on," Perry said, and he had the sedation authorization form in one hand, pen already uncapped, already moving toward the signature line at the bottom, because the clock on the wall said 11:50, and the procedure was scheduled for noon, and county policy did not care about a wand chirping in a crouched woman's hand.
"Ms. Vogel, I need that form back in the folder in the next 5 minutes, or I have to call this in as a scheduling failure, and that goes on both our names."
"His call sign's on here," Bernie said, cutting through him, not raising her voice, just refusing to lower it either. "Deployment tag reads, hold on, Kilo 7, canine designation. Unit attached to a mountain recon element, and then there's a call sign field. It's mostly worn, but I can make out—" "Ranger," Lorenzo said. He said it low. He said it before she'd finished the sentence, before the last letters had come up on the little cracked screen in her hand. And the room went the particular kind of quiet that isn't the absence of sound so much as everyone in it holding their breath at the same time. Perry's pen stopped an inch above the paper. Bernie's eyes came up off the wand and onto Lorenzo's face, like she was checking whether she'd imagined it. "That's—" She looked back down, read the rest, looked back up slower this time. "That's exactly what it says." "I know," Lorenzo said. Perry's mouth was still open around whatever he'd been about to say next, some line about the 5-minute window, about the folder, about the clock on the wall that had, until about 4 seconds ago, been the only authority in the room that mattered. He closed it, opened it again. "How?" he said, and it wasn't procedure anymore. It was just a man standing in the middle of something he didn't understand with a pen still uncapped in his hand. How do you know that? Nobody knows that.
"That's not written on anything visible. That chip record's sealed to civilian."
"Because I trained the man who trained him," Lorenzo said. He hadn't looked away from Ranger the whole time, not once. The dog had gone still too, in a different way than before. Ears no longer flat, head coming up an inch, nose working the air like it had caught something it hadn't smelled in a long time and wasn't sure yet whether to believe. "2 months I've been sitting outside that kennel," Lorenzo said, quieter now, and his voice had dropped into a register that wasn't for the room anymore, wasn't for Perry and his form, or Bernie and her wand. "And every week I told myself I'd say something, and every week I didn't, because saying it made it real, and I have had enough real for one lifetime already." Bernie's hand, still holding the wand, had gone slack at her side. Perry hadn't moved. The pen was still uncapped, still hovering, forgotten. Now Bernie looked down at the microchip record in her hand, the little screen still glowing with the number the wand had pulled off the back of Ranger's neck. She cleared her throat. She'd done this 100 times, reading a chip number into a file, matching it to an owner, closing a loop. This one had a deployment tag attached to it, a string of letters and numbers she didn't fully understand, and beneath that, in smaller print, a call sign field that most civilian chips didn't even carry. "Registered handler unit, forward deployed," she read, slow,
sounding out the designation like a word in a language she'd only seen written down. Working dog, designation... Ranger, Lorenzo said. He said it before she got there, said it low, without looking at the screen, without looking at her at all. He was looking at the dog. Bernie's mouth was still open around the first syllable of what the record actually said. She looked down to check. Her thumb found the line. The letters matched, one for one, what the old man in the canvas coat had just said out loud before she'd finished the sentence. She didn't say anything for a second. The room had gone quiet in a different way than before. Not the quiet of a policy standoff, but the quiet that comes when somebody in the room understands they've been standing next to something they didn't have the eyes to see. That's... Bernie stopped, started again. That's exactly what it says. Perry's pen had not moved from where it hovered over the authorization line. He was looking at Lorenzo now with an expression that had nothing left of the clock in it, nothing left of the 10:40 appointment or the county form, or the language about civilian visitors clearing the intake room. He looked, for the first time since Lorenzo had walked in and set down his chair, like a man trying to recalculate something from the beginning. "You knew that?" Perry said. It wasn't a question so much as a man saying a fact out loud to make himself believe it. Before she read it, "You already knew his name?" Lorenzo didn't answer that directly. He kept his eyes on the dog, on the low set of the ears, on the way Ranger's weight had shifted off his back left leg the second the wand touched his neck. A detail nobody else in the room had clocked, because nobody else in the room had spent 40 minutes twice a week for 2 months learning the specific geometry of how this particular animal held pain. "He answers to it still," Lorenzo said. "Watch him." He said the name again, not loud, not a command, just a word offered into the space between the chair and the kennel door, the way you'd offer a hand. Ranger's ears came up. Not both. The left one didn't move the way the right one did, some old scar tissue or nerve damage keeping it half set. But both eyes came off Perry and onto Lorenzo. And the low sound in his chest, the one that had put everybody in the room on edge 20 minutes earlier, dropped away entirely. Bernie looked at the record again, looked at Lorenzo, looked at the record. "Mr. Hogan," she said, and his last name in her mouth had a different weight to it now than it had when Perry had used it on the intake sheet an hour before. "How do you know this dog's call sign?" It was the same question that had been sitting under the room since he'd unfolded that chair, the question nobody had quite had the nerve to ask straight. And now it was out, hanging there, and Perry's pen still hadn't touched the page. Lorenzo took a breath, the same deep, even diaphragm breath he'd been taking since he walked in, the one that hadn't sped up once through any of it. He reached down, not toward the dog, toward the arm of the camp chair, running his thumb along the worn stitching where the canvas met the frame. The same repair he'd made a dozen times over, and did not answer Bernie's question yet. Behind him, near the far wall, the tech assigned to the sedation had already pulled the pole syringe off its rack. She was a young woman, competent-looking, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this before and didn't want to do it again, but would, because the hour was the hour. "He's cleared for handling under restraint," she said, mostly to Perry, already crossing toward the kennel gate. "I can get him sedated before the vet arrives. It'll be easier on him." "Don't open that gate." Lorenzo hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Something in the register of it, low and level, stopped her hand on the latch. "He's guarding his right shoulder," Lorenzo said, still seated, still breathing the same unhurried breath. "Look at the weight. He's not loading that leg at all. He's carrying it high and rolled in, like it costs him something every time he sets it down. That's not a dog deciding to be dangerous. That's a dog protecting a joint that never healed right."
Perry's pen was still in his hand, hovering somewhere above the order line. That's not what the intake notes say. Notes say aggressive on approach, unhandleable, high bite risk. Notes are describing what happens when somebody grabs him wrong. Lorenzo rose from the chair, unhurried, joints announcing themselves quietly the way old joints do, and stepped toward the kennel with his hands open and low. Old harness rigging, high-altitude work, the kind we used to run dogs in when the terrain didn't leave room for a leash and a handler both. If the webbing sits wrong across the shoulder for months at a time, it pulls the joint out of alignment.
Nobody catches it until the dog's out of service, and somebody finally tries to touch that spot without knowing it's there.
Ranger's ears had come up, not aggressive, listening. "Sir, I can't let you," Perry started. "Watch," Lorenzo said, not unkindly, and it wasn't a request. He crouched at the gate, slow, no sudden angles, and let Ranger see both hands before either one moved. When he reached through the bars, it wasn't for the collar, and it wasn't for the leash clip. It was 2 fingers, flat, finding the point just behind the shoulder blade, where the muscle had knotted hard as a fist. And he didn't press it. He cupped under it, lifting the weight of the leg without ever gripping the leg itself. The way you'd take pressure off a rigging strap before you loosened the buckle. Ranger's growl caught in his throat and didn't finish. The dog's whole body dropped an inch. Ears came fully forward. The rolled, protective stance eased. The leg came down flat and even.
And for the first time since Lorenzo had walked into that room, Ranger leaned his weight into a human hand instead of away from it. "There," Lorenzo said, quiet, mostly to the dog. "There it is." Nobody in the room moved. The tech had lowered the pole syringe without seeming to notice she'd done it. "That's a pressure relief hold," Lorenzo said, straightening, keeping his hand where it was a moment longer before letting it go. Taught it to handlers running dogs off pack straps on grades no vehicle could climb. You don't fight the joint, you take the load off it. Any tech in this county could learn that hold in an afternoon and never need a sedation order on this dog again. Perry looked at the sedation syringe, still capped in the tech's hand, then at Ranger, who had gone quiet under Lorenzo's palm. The low growl replaced by a long breath out through the nose. Perry looked like a man recalculating everything he'd been sure of 10 minutes ago. "You said you taught handlers," Perry said. "Which handlers?" Bernie was still holding the microchip printout, the deployment tag number circled in pen where she'd copied it off the screen. She hadn't finished reading it. She didn't need to now. Lorenzo didn't answer Perry. He knelt instead, slow, the way a man kneels when his knees have opinions about it. And he put his other hand on the side of Ranger's neck, thumb finding the place behind the ear where the dog's service mark had faded to a gray shadow under the fur. Ranger leaned into it. "Not much. Enough." "Sergeant First Class Wayne Prater," Lorenzo said. "I ran the handler course he came through. 3rd rotation I trained. Good hands, better instincts than most I had. I taught him how this dog reads terrain before he reads a compass. Taught him the hold I just showed your tech. Taught him what to do if the dog went down hurt on a slope with no vehicle within 6 hours. He paused. His breathing hadn't changed. It never did. I didn't teach him what to do if he didn't come back down himself. Bernie's hand had gone still around the printout. "He's not in this file," Lorenzo said, nodding at the papers in her hands without looking at them. "No next of kin. That's why nobody claimed the dog when the unit rotated him stateside. That's why he's been sitting in intake for 2 years, getting passed between 3 counties. Nobody wanted a dog with a bad file and a bad hip and no name attached to sign for him." He looked at Ranger, not at Bernie, not at Perry. "I've known where he was for 2 months. First day I walked in here, I knew him by the way he stood, before I ever saw his ear." "Then why didn't you—" Perry started and stopped himself, because he already understood the shape of the answer, and didn't want to make Lorenzo say the rest of it standing up. Lorenzo said it anyway, kneeling, one hand still on the dog. I asked the county twice. Both times I was told the adoption window on a flagged intake had already closed, that he'd been red tagged for behavior before I ever got out here the first time. Paperwork does what paperwork does. He didn't say it bitter. He said it like weather. So I came back anyway, brought a chair,
Sat outside his kennel every week and didn't sign anything, because I didn't know how to walk in here and tell you all what he was without also telling you what happened to the man who trained him, and how I'm the one who taught that man to bring dogs like this one home alive, off ground that wanted to kill both of them. The room had gone quiet enough that the fluorescent light overhead made its thin electric hum audible for the first time. I taught your handler how to bring you home, Lorenzo said, low to the dog, not lifting his eyes to the room. Nobody taught me how to bring mine. Nobody spoke for a moment. Perry looked down at the sedation order still in his hand, the clock on the wall reading 4 minutes past the hour it had been scheduled to matter, and set the paper down on the counter without signing it. "Give me the adoption file," Perry said to Bernie, quiet now, none of the clipped procedure left in his voice. "Whatever window we said was closed. I'm reopening it." Lorenzo reached into his coat, not for the wallet Bernie expected, but for a stub of pencil worn to a nub, the kind a man keeps because it still writes. He signed the line himself, didn't hesitate over the name, didn't ask what came after. Bernie watched his hand move, steady, unhurried, the same hand that had held the lead an hour before without a tremor in it. Nobody spoke while he worked the leash clip free from the kennel gate. Ranger came out slow, favoring the shoulder, and leaned his weight into Lorenzo's leg the way a tired animal leans into something that has already proven it will hold. Outside, the light had gone the color of weak tea. Lorenzo folded the camp chair one joint at a time, the canvas soft from years of hands doing exactly this, and set it flat in the truck bed. Ranger climbed up after it without being asked, and lay down with his head against the worn seat, like he'd done it 100 times before, in some other truck, for some other man. Lorenzo stood at the tailgate a moment, one hand resting on the dog's flank, breathing slow and even as ever. Behind them, the shelter's porch light clicked off.